You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And that's what happened with Vice, basically. I joined Vice in 2013. I'd actually been talking to them for quite some time. I met their editor-in-chief in 2011. He asked me if I'd ever be interested in doing stuff with them, and I said probably not. And mostly because I just didn't know or care. But I wanted to do something on my own. I didn't want to work for somebody. So a year later, after doing something on my own and proving what I did worked, I reached back out to them. End of 2012. It took about 6 months. Finally decided to bring me on. At the time, Vice had produced some of its most watched content. Granted, they've produced some very, they still make documentaries that do really, really well, don't get me wrong. But they had a string of hits. The Cannibal in Liberia, Scopolamine, Bulletproof Clothing, The Biggest Butt in Brazil. And so when I was coming in, I'm like, dude, this is cool. I want to do that kind of stuff. And I did, for a little while. But I could see very quickly how the company actually functioned, what the goals were, and I thought, for the most part, I can see where they're going. I would butt heads with some of the management guys, but I'll say this too, Shane Smith, I think he's a great dude. I think he's a really nice guy. I think he treats people, I think he's a good guy. I think he looks out for those who work for him, and he takes care of those who support him. But I believe his day has come and gone. You know, he stepped down as CEO, and now we have this article from The Economist. The biggest brand in digital media has lost much of its luster. And I think the reason, there's a couple reasons. For one, you needed Shane. You know, he's still there, obviously, he didn't quit, but he's not the CEO anymore. The company became too big, there was sexual harassment scandals, and then Shane stepped down. And I don't know if he's as involved as he was anymore. My assumption is that he isn't. And without Shane, without that desire to be rough around the edges and to be punk rock, as it were, you just become another generic media brand. And that's what happened. And now Vice, they've peaked. Their value was going up and up and up, and now it started to actually go down. Let's see what The Economist has to say. I got some other articles I want to talk about. Soon after the new year in 2015, Shane Smith, co-founder of Vice Media, enjoyed an epic run at the blackjack tables in Las Vegas and spent $300,000 of his $1 million winnings on dinner and booze with his buddies, according to media reports. It was a heady moment to be gambling in and on digital media. BuzzFeed and Vox Media, which like Vice were rapidly accumulating young audiences coveted by advertisers, would eventually be valued by investors at $1.7 billion and $1 billion respectively. By June 2017, Mr. Smith had charmed the likes of Fox, Disney, and TPG, a private equity firm, into investing a combined $1.4 billion in his rapidly expanding news, cable, video, and advertising operation. Vice, which started out as a print magazine called Voice of Montreal, was valued at $5.7 billion. Shane Smith won an award from the Knight Foundation. And this is something that was shocking to me, I suppose, because I had quit already, right? What was shocking to me is that Shane invited me, but I was invited to come to this event after I'd already quit. So I'm sitting in the audience with a group of maybe like 50 people as Vice announces a scholarship, as they present this award to Shane Smith, and someone asked him, did you ever think Vice would be doing news? And Shane said, not really. There were a couple things that made them think they have to do more meaningful content, but then he said something about, he pointed to me and says, but when Tim Pool joined and started doing this on-the-ground reporting, you know, that's what really kicked it off. And I didn't realize that at the time. When I started working at Vice, I was pushing them to do on-the-ground reporting. I said we should go to Gezi Park. There's this massive protest uprising in Turkey. And they, you know, scratched their chin and said, well, you know, we typically do documentary that takes like 3 months to produce. We don't do this stuff. And I said, well, you know, I'm going to go do it. They ended up funding it. They hired me after I was already in Turkey. And then I started doing live streaming, which shattered a bunch of viewership records. And then apparently they were like, it's on. Let's do more of this. And since then, Vice News has had some pretty great accolades, winning Emmys and Peabody Awards and Webbies and all this stuff. At the time, when I was there, it was the fastest growing news organization for its time, right? They gained something like 1 million subscribers in a matter of months. And I eventually left. And I was grateful because when I quit, Shane still said, you know, Tim Pool was like the guy who came in here and made this change, that because they were doing off-cycle news stuff. They weren't doing on-the-ground field reporting. I could tell when I worked there that it was more about prestige and more about, you know, I just felt like it was becoming more and more corporate. Now, Vice produces, Vice video content is still, it's okay. It's not as good as it once was, in my opinion. Some of the stuff is good. But it's because they had a core set of really great producers and really, really interesting writers. As the company expands, they add more and more people and the talent pool goes lower and lower, and then the bulk of the content, because they start producing more content, becomes lowbrow and boring and generic. And as that was happening, I said, you know what? I need to go do something else, because what I want to do here, it's changing. And so I left. But let's read on. We'll carry on a little bit more about Vice. They say, no longer. Vice and other formerly hot digital media properties are on a losing streak, as Google and Facebook have squashed all competitors in the digital advertising marketplace. The duopoly commands the majority of the $100 billion internet advertising market in America. Vice, BuzzFeed, and Vox combined get less than 1% of that market. Vice fell well short of its sales target for 2017 of $800 million and will fare a little better in 2018 with perhaps $700 million in revenues. Previously profitable, Vice is losing money. The company has also been beset with allegations of sexual harassment and reports of misogynistic culture. In March, Mr. Smith stepped aside as chief executive and was replaced by Nancy Dubuque, the boss of A&E Networks, which helps oversee Viceland, a Vice-operated cable channel. Ms. Dubuque has said the plans to trim the workforce to reach profitability next year. In November, Disney disclosed it had written down its $400 million investment by $157 million. That puts the value of Vice Media around $2.5 billion to $2.7 billion, a steep drop, nearly 50%. Now let's talk about media. So I made a video a couple days ago talking about how media was dying. Vice, Vox, BuzzFeed, they're not doing too well. And I want to point out another article that shows you exactly what happens when these companies begin failing. John Oliver, David Simon, HBO writers pressure Vice to make a deal with the Writers Guild. Okay, let me ask something. You guys can comment below and let me know what you think. If your company is losing money, you're not generating a profit, you're in a bad position. And given a long enough period of time of not making money, you will cease to exist. Does it then make sense to pay people more money and give people more benefits? Absolutely not. But this invariably is what happens, because now you've got people demanding that Vice make a deal with the Writers Guild. John Oliver, David Simon, Eric Overmyer, Tom Fontana, and Warren Light are among 78 writers of HBO shows who have signed a petition urging Vice Media to pen a contract with the Writers Guild of America East. As Writers Guild members, we have protections under a collective bargaining agreement, the petition reads. Our fellow union members at Vice Media deserve no less. Editorial staffers at Vice ratified their first contract in 2016. About 430 Vice Media employees unionized last year, with the company management agreeing to be represented through the WGA East and the Motion Picture Guild Editors Guild. Interesting. They were on track to make a lot of money. They were doing really well. They unionized. Now they're losing money. I'm not saying necessarily that the union is what caused it, but I can say that typically when you get to collective bargaining contracts, salaries go up, guarantees are made, and benefits are issued out. That costs money. And if Vice wasn't doing that well to begin with, then they're going to do worse. And now they're doing even worse. And now there's more pressure to do another deal with the union. What does that mean? Well, as we know, Vice needs to lose a massive amount of employees. I think it's over 1,000. And they're doing it by attrition. What that means is they're not going to fire people, but they're on a hiring freeze. And as people quit, they will not replace them. Vice was the golden child of this era. They were worth the most, $5.7 billion. They've lost half their value. That means the net worth of Shane Smith has gone down based on how much stock he's holding. But Shane Smith did also sell. This is something that affects all of these media companies, basically. They don't make enough money to do this. Vice certainly made a decent amount of money, and technically Vice made some people very wealthy. But the idea that it's profit that made Shane wealthy is wrong. Sure, I would say, yeah, obviously they made a lot of profit, and Shane and the people at the top did get wealthy from those profits, but in terms of Shane's true net worth, he sold stock. The value of the company itself was the value he had as being a billionaire. Shane Smith, I believe, was a billionaire at its peak. I don't know if he's a billionaire anymore, unless he sold his stock and diversified it. I'm not entirely sure because I left in 2014. But I think it's fair to say when you see something like this, if Vice was the best of the best, and they're now retracting, they're not hitting their revenue goals, they're being pressured by unions, and they have to get rid of people, they were the best. What do you think that means for everybody else? Unfortunately, it sounds like Vice, which was this once edgy. I mean, look at this photo. See, this is the photo I remember where I was like, dude, so cool. the TV, the rabbit ears, looks like it's a war-torn area, there's something flipped over, and you see that and you go, man, that's cool. But now what is Vice? They write garbage articles. They used to write silly articles that were fun. Now they write crazy clickbait nonsense. And I look at these articles and I'm like, damn, really? Like, that's not right. Like, they just smeared Sargon, who got banned from Patreon, calling him like a bunch of ridiculous things. And I have to wonder sometimes what happened. But a lot of people I know who worked at Vice left. A lot of the Vice News people were let go. And ultimately, I believe that the success of Vice came from Shane Smith, pure and simple. I think Shane's a good dude. I think he takes care of those who are loyal to him. And when he stepped down, for whatever reason, there was a lot of controversy, there's no way Vice can survive without him. And that's something we all knew. When we worked at Vice, a lot of people said there will come a time when Shane cashes out or leaves or sells. And when that happens, they're not going to make it. Because Shane was really the mastermind. But anyway, what can you do? That's it, I guess. Thanks for hanging out. Stick around. There's more videos. They're coming up. You know the whole thing. So click the name and you'll see it. See you in a minute.